Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video. And in this video, we are going to talk about what triggers a dismissive avoidant and why. And we are going to talk about the primary triggers specifically. If you are new to this channel, I create daily breakthrough videos for you to learn powerful tools to upgrade your life and relationships at the subconscious level. So let's talk about this. What are the top triggers of a dismissive avoidant? Well, number one, and this is probably one of their biggest triggers overall, is if there's volatility in relationships. Now, the reason this is one of the biggest triggers is because dismissive avoidants at a subconscious level very much value safety. And they tend to experience safety in relationships through consistency, through predictability in a partner, through somebody who shows up, through somebody who's congruent. And emotional volatility can be really triggering to them because they often feel like things are unpredictable and they feel unsafe. And if we look, a lot of the highest personality needs for dismissive avoidance really tend to revolve around safety, security, certainty, those sorts of things. So they tend to be really important for dismissive avoidance overall. And obviously, this is also a big part of what creates attraction between ourselves and other people. Does somebody line up with our needs and meet them, or do they not? And so when somebody is not just not meeting a need, but actively taking away from that need, it can really create a lot of challenges in the relationship dynamic. Now, something that can be confusing about this to the partner of a dismissive avoidant is sometimes if there's a fearful avoidant or a more volatile person, not like person, but somebody who has volatile behaviors because their emotions are volatile within them because they've usually past traumas and unresolved wounds and triggers. And then, sometimes the DA is triggering that person as well. When that volatility is expressed or when it comes out, sometimes initially, if a DA loves that person and wants to stay in that relationship, if let's say a fearful avoidant, for example, threatens to break up with the dismissive avoidant, sometimes initially the dismissive avoidant will try harder or show up more. And that initial experience of that is often because it feels very unsafe to break up. And if a DA is feeling connected and invested in their partner, they may initially be like, no, I don't want to break up, and they'll try harder. But basically what happens is it's you almost see this initial peak of oh, that went well. And it's almost positively reinforcing the emotional volatility within the dynamic. But soon after, it really drops off and the relationship starts to erode slowly over time. So even though there may be I would almost imagine if you could look at it visually, that you may see short-term gratification from threatening to break up with a DA partner, but then long-term, the relationship actually erodes to below where it originally started from. So you keep seeing these little spikes, but they keep kind of happening on the way down to the relationship devolving over time. And so that's just a really important thing to keep in mind, because I've had a lot of conversations with people over the years that are like, yeah, but when I threaten to break up with my DA partner, they suddenly show up, but that's actually still damaging the relationship long term. So that is number one, and it has a huge impact. Number two, by the way, if you're somebody who's experiencing emotional volatility in the dynamic and you've got a lot of that pain inside of you and stuff that's showing up, that is not your fault. It's, that comes from trauma. And yet it is still your responsibility. And it's sort of this interesting dynamic where it's you still want to be able to reprogram those core wounds, those things that are showing up and causing pain in the dynamic. If you want to do a deep dive into exactly what that stuff is all about, the best course, it's one of my favorite courses inside of PDS. I probably don't talk about it enough. It's the Emotional Mastery and Belief Reprogramming course. It will give you your blueprint for how to deal with all of the different triggers that exist within your subconscious mind, how to very specifically isolate them, and then how to do breakthrough reprogramming at a subconscious level so you can erase those things once and for all and be free of these major core wounds. We have a 7-day free trial, so there's a link in the description box below. You can check that out. That applies to fearful avoidance, dismissive avoidance, anxious, preoccupied. You can get get rid of a lot of those fears of being abandoned, being alone, really regulate your nervous system accordingly. Lots of really good stuff in there. So anyways, that is one of my favorite courses. Check it out. You can check it out for free for 7 days, which is honestly enough time to do a deep dive into the course. So check it out. Okay. Next thing. Criticism. Criticism is a big trigger for dismissive avoidance. And sometimes in a workplace, they'll deal well on a surface level with like constructive criticism, but when there's like criticism because there's fighting or arguing and there's like words that are sharp or cut deep or like things that somebody hears in a relationship that are mean or harsh or too blunt, dismissive avoidants can take that really, really personally. And a big reason for this is it triggers their I am defective core wound, and they feel a lot of shame. And usually whenever anybody feels shame, the next thing they want to do is hide, right? Like if anybody's ever felt like embarrassed in public, like let's say you were like in school as a kid and you dropped your lunch and it exploded everywhere and it spilled all over you and you were embarrassed, like usually want to run away from the situation, right? Like usually whenever there's some kind of shame feeling or embarrassment feeling, we want to hide. And what we'll often see is because DAs tend to feel some more pervasive shame, they feel pervasive shame more easily because it's a lot of their subconscious triggering and patterning. Then they're often pulling back and withdrawing into themselves more often and keeping space between themselves and others as that protective mechanism, as a byproduct of that. So that tends to be another major core trigger. Number 3, expectation. This tends to be a really big core wound for, not core wound, but sort of like trigger dynamic for dismissive avoidance. And it's because they feel a lot of the time, like when there's some kind of expectation placed upon them, they're made to feel like they're incapable. And a lot of dismissive avoidants, I've had many conversations over the years with DAs who say things like this to me. They'll say, I really want to show up for my partner, for my loved one, but sometimes they want stuff and I don't know how they are wanting that thing. So let's say, for example, the partner says, I want to feel more loved. And maybe to a DA, feeling more loved would be like giving acts of service. And to the partner, what more loved was actually physical affection. If the DA feels like they're trying and they're putting themselves out there and that it's not going well because maybe there's actually just a miscommunication in terms of what being more loved really looks like to each party. As soon as they feel like there's this expectation, usually they feel like I'm not capable. Usually they have a lot of history of feeling like they are trying in their way, but they're not quite understanding what the other person specifically wants, because a lot of times we're not communicating specifically enough. And then the DA just feels incapable and often defeated. And they will get this like very strong, like why bother kind of mentality that comes out. And it's not because they don't care. It's because they feel defeated. They feel hurt. They're like, I'm trying. It's already hard for me to try and be vulnerable. I try. And then you still get upset and you still say you feel unloved, when really the entire time, a lot of what's not usually surfacing is just that there's miscommunications really largely taking place. And so with that being said, these expectation dynamics can be triggering for a DA because they usually fear that they're just going to feel incapable and then defeated long term. So that can be a really big trigger in relationships as well. And that's just like, a very easy fix in terms of communicate what you're needing from your partner very specifically, very directly. And that tends to be very beneficial. Number 4, pressure to open up or to be more vulnerable. Okay. So a lot of pressure around vulnerability. And these tend to trigger wounds of the DA feeling unsafe, like we talked about, but also fear of being trapped, fear of feeling weak, or fear of being controlled by somebody else if there's this pressuring dynamic. And really that controlled feeling is this, profound fear of losing their independence, right? Losing their autonomy, their sense of self, because they tend to associate me taking care of myself, me showing up for myself. This is how I stay safe. This is how my life works. And anybody who's going to pose a threat to that, they get very, very triggered, almost like to a survival perspective, like very, very deeply triggered in a very strong way. So, again, when there's pressure to open up, instead, something that's much healthier is to create a really safe, harmonious dynamic in a relationship by sharing, by opening up, by asking questions, but not pressuring, just by being curious. And if you see that there's pushback or a disconnect, to leave it alone and respect that privacy and that autonomy and that independence. And over time, the more there's safety, the more you're leading by example, by sharing, by opening up, and then allowing space for somebody to open up as well. Usually that's actually the fastest, most efficient way to create that openness and that sort of bond between the two of you. And number 5, as a top 5 trigger, is not feeling acknowledged. So DAs don't tend to need like a lot of attention or a tremendous amount of approval. but they do value like feeling acknowledged, feeling positively reinforced when they're trying. And it's largely because they don't sometimes know, like, am I doing a good job at this emotional stuff? Right. And it's like they don't have context for stuff because they usually didn't have a lot of modeling. So when they're trying and they feel like nobody's acknowledging that they're trying, and because it's usually so much for them to try in relationships, like if somebody came to somebody who's secure and says, hey, I need you to open up more, you might be like, oh, interesting. I can open up more. You might try it. It may feel like you stretch yourself a little bit. To a DA, if you're like, I need you to open up more, it's really like, hey, I need you to face your biggest fears in the world and let's do it. And, you know, like to a DA doing that, them facing their biggest fears is a really big deal a lot of the time. So you can have this dynamic at play where it's like all of a sudden really scary for somebody. And it's a big ask. It's this big of a stretch, not this big of a stretch. And so when they feel like they did this big of a stretch and then they still didn't get acknowledged or they even got criticized, this is where they can feel really shut down and really frustrated and really sort of disconnected in that dynamic or situation. And then the last thing I would say is sort of like a bonus number 6 in here is DAs can also feel very triggered if they feel like their boundaries are being violated, if they feel like somebody's infringing on their privacy, their personal space, that sort of thing. It can kind of go hand in hand with the pressure to open up or be more vulnerable, but obviously that can be a big one as well. So those are our top 5 to 6 major triggers for DAs. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know any questions you have in the comments below. I can do a follow-up series on this. I can do a follow-up on like what to do more specifically in terms of like how to deal with these different triggers and relationship dynamics. I know I touched on them a little bit at a high level, but let me know if you want to see more. And also if you want to do a deep dive into reprogramming your attachment style, we also have the 7-day free trial offered for the reprogramming your attachment style courses, which you can find in the link in the description box below. If you join the all access pass for the 7 days, it gives you access to all of those different courses. So check it out. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.